Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Well, welcome to this controversial session about fashion, whether it creates bonds and links. So we have the delight to have with us a true European. We have Anoushka BORGHESI. She has a German mum. Yes, I'm starting again because the microphone wasn't up to my mouth. Yes, we have Anoushka with us. She was born in London. Her mum is German. Her dad is Italian. And she has carried out a lot of her career with Yves Saint Laurent in Paris. She was Director of Communication for Europe. And now she is World Director for Media and Public Relations at Giorgio Armani. So everyone knows who Giorgio Armani is. So alongside Anoushka, we've got Pascal, Executive President of the Haute Couture and Fashion Federation here in France. He also has another career. At the same time, he is also an economics professor. I met him when I was just a young girl. We studied economics together. So, does fashion create bonds? Well, of course it does. Cultural links and bonds. We see that during the fashion shows. We see it at Fashion Week. Economic links as well, because it is an economic activity. It's a business. And particularly a thriving business here in Paris, part of the CAC 40. And it also creates sociological links because it can occasionally enable people feel they belong to a community. One could even add, if we want to do a bit of dark humour here, some political links, because there was one law which was voted in unanimously, 14th of March last. It was a draft law about pop-up fashion or fast fashion. So fashion can bring people together, make them agree about something, despite the fact that itself is fleeting. So fashion suffers some controversies. And my first question to my panelists is fashion inclusive or is it exclusive? I'm thinking of luxury fashion, haute couture. We see that most people can't afford it. So are we inclusive or exclusive? Anoushka. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for welcoming me here. I've slipped away from Milan to be here for a couple of days. So fashion, I would say that the answer is between both of them. I cannot deny that it can be exclusive. It excludes people because prices can be very, very high. We see that during the fashion shows. Although we like to say that we have we're giving people wage increases to be more democratic, but it doesn't really reach haute couture. Not when you're talking about the most luxurious items. However, more recently, it's becoming more inclusive, I would say. Not only speaking from my own experience at Giorgio Armani, we are really at the very beginning. Giorgio Armani in '85, he decided to launch Emporio Armani. He wanted to speak to as many people as possible. He didn't only want to be addressing people with a certain revenue. He didn't want to only allow the rich to buy Armani. He wanted to create garments that were more inclusive. And then there was Armani Exchange, of course. You may be familiar with that. That's even more inclusive. But it's inclusive also for all people. We've got streaming for haute couture on social media. People can see what's going on in haute couture. And we have inclusion with sport, for example. There are going to be the Olympic Games in Paris this year. There are brands like LVMH have a partnership with the Olympic Games. They know that they can target a huge population. And it's the same for us. Armani has always had a sports line, and we also always try to be involved in sport to be as inclusive as possible. I'm going to hand the floor over to my fellow panel member. Yeah, I agree with what Anoushka said. Yes, fashion can be so very inclusive. Let me explain what I mean. When we're talking about fashion, let's be clear about what we're talking about. There are different categories of fashion. It's like the ready-to-wear label. You can use ready-to-wear for Dior, created by Dior, or ready-to-wear clothes, which comes from the fast fashion channel. So it depends what you're talking about. And then the very heart of the fashion system is there, but it covers all kinds of sectors with a wide range of prices also from one brand to the next. So in a nutshell, what I'd like to say about these different points to do with inclusion is we've got this perception, and fashion clothes are a symbol. We know this. I'd just like to mention, to quote Balzac, and talking about the hieroglyphs and fashion, which is a type of communication. There are other things to be mentioned. The fact that when you're talking about designer labels, you've got a range of prices. There are links around the globe, very, very strong links for all kinds of people. Just take a look at how a studio is made up, for example. You can see the artistic director and see the artistic community of a town or city, which comes together, and fashion can play a leading role. And, of course, there's the notion of a community. And perhaps I can say a bit more about that. Just take a look at the number of followers on social networks. There are amazing figures. Fashion is not the only case in hand. There's film and there's music as well. But fashion really is in the leading line there. Let me give you a bit of a story here. One day, I was going to the Minister of Finance in France on the River Seine. I was on the 6th floor, and I was wearing some Off-White trainers. Off-White is a brand which was founded by Virgil Abloh, who then became director of the men's line at Louis Vuitton. And there was a manager there on the 6th floor who came to see me. One came to see me, and the fact that I was wearing these trainers by Off-White meant that we belonged to the same community, because obviously he was wearing similar shoes. So he started to talk to me. We talked about Virgil Abloh, and he said that, you know, Virgil has inspired us all. And so it's all about inspiration, a community, thanks to creation and imagination, and through this paradigm of the style that is inherent in each fashion designer or artistic director. So, Pascal, given what you've just said, if that creates communitarianism, that doesn't create links, that creates exclusion. No, but it's a very open communitarianism. It's a community of rituals. It's extremely open and very well respected. It's full of respect and diversity. I'm not saying this because Anoushka's here, but we all respect Mr. Armani and everything that he's done, everything he represents. But there's also a lot of respect for all creators when they get together, all of them, well, in fashion and beyond, all of those people who breathe life into these things, everyone who understands the present moment in time, and many of them who can anticipate the future, as other artists can do in other fields. So let's move on to the second question. Is fashion international or local? Well, they have the economists will say that there's a value chain which is international. However, there seems to be a trend to producing more locally. We like clothes that are made in France or made in Italy, and it really has a strong message. So what would one say about that? Is fashion international, global, or is it local? Well, the first thing I'd like to say is to talk about this dualism in marketism. You've got marketing is talking to the consumer and to the creators. So we're marketing an offering rather than marketing supply rather than demand. So marketing can be very, very basic. At the end of the day, what you're trying to do is to design globally but offer locally, whereas it can be the other way around. But the main principle is to have an identity that has been designed locally, which engages with global codes, so that once again for luxury brands, so you can have an echo, and that is really what it's all about. And that's the reason why when you're talking about a medium or top range brand, export figures are kind of limited, whereas in other cases you will export 90% or more. What about you, Anoushka? Yes, of course it's global, but it's becoming increasingly local. Mr. Armani at the head office is at the head office in Milan, and he hardly ever leaves the office, in fact. But most of the production is in Italy. But we know, for reasons which I've already mentioned, when we created Emporio Armani and Armani Exchange, we wanted to have lower prices, and that meant that we could no longer produce only in Italy. We had to produce elsewhere, but there are very good solutions elsewhere, not only in Italy. And we've continued to grow. Next year, the brand will have been around for 50 years. And so we are still independent, despite all of these big luxury groups which are becoming more and more competitive, because we've got our markets which we have developed outside Italy. Italy remains our biggest market. It's important to underline that. Italy is where we have our highest sales figures in Europe. We've got other great markets such as France. We're happy that we're so successful in France, but in the rest of the world we are present. Mr. Armani was one of the first to go out to China. 25 years ago, he's really respected, but we have tried to use markets. We've wanted to have slow growth, careful growth, global growth. For fashion and designer brands, production is in Italy a lot, mostly, some in France and a lot in Europe, Eastern and Central Europe. But we also see, for ecological reasons, that we want to have this local identity, and the whole challenge for such brands is to be able to have a business model which is long-lasting and will withstand competition from major players in the fast fashion section. So that leads me on to my next question, which could be a rather unpleasant question. Is fashion negative for the environment? Does it drive people to over-consume? How would you deal with that? Who wants to kick off? Of course, we know that we do not need all of these garments today. We do not need all of these collections. But fashion is one of the industries which pollutes the most. But we're trying to clean up our act. And Mr. Armani has always believed in long-lasting fashion. If we do things with this in mind, make sure that our garments are of top quality, we can pass things on to our next generations, items that are timeless. Mr. Armani, of course, will follow trends and seasons, but fashion can help. We just have to be very careful, always, to do fewer collections and to be more careful in your production. During the pandemic, Mr. Armani wrote a letter saying that the seasons really have to be respected, and you mustn't prepare your collection 6 months upstream of the season. So there's a lot that needs to be done. We're trying to work on that. I would say that clothing brands brands such as Armani and others. Jack Muse and Omami, all of these younger brands that are working very, very well, are very successful. If you take a look at how their prices have evolved on the second-hand market, the prices can go down, but they are rather stable when you compare with other categories of goods. There is a structural problem with fashion. It's an environmental problem. You've got one crazy idea. It's a lie which has been repeated time and time again, and that makes it become truth, as Confucius would say. And it is said that it's the second most polluting sector or industry. And that has become a kind of a mantra. People believe that. If there was a ranking, it would be, I think, 4th or 5th, which is already a serious problem. But when you're talking about pollution and polluting the environment, that's one thing. But when you talk about impact on the environment, by definition in economic terms, there's a big problem of volume, and things aren't looking good on that front, because we've got this business model that can potentially aggravate the situation. So our annual production is about 100 billion, 120 billion garments per year. So that's a lot of clothing. And when you're looking at the haute couture end, it's like 1,000 times fewer pieces of clothing which are being produced. So there's a challenge here in terms of the different challenges and the scale, legitimacy of these databases. When you're measuring impacts, it can be very complex to do. You have to analyze the industrial process, and there are new models, of course. You talked about fast fashion. Today, there's ultra-fast fashion as well, with platforms such as Shine and Temu, which are offering dresses that cost just €5 or a coat for €10. And that means that demand today is directed at students. The students might prefer these brands to, say, Zara. So there's a lot of challenges here in terms of the volume of garments which are produced. The main problem is processing this question of volume. We really do have to work on that subject. But these luxury brands still have a role to play here. Their impact is relatively low, but they must set an example. And that's why they're carrying out so many projects. That's why they're working so hard on this score. Yes, you're making me think of a survey carried out in France not so long ago. Do you think that we are consuming too many garments here in France? And most people said yes. The next question was, do you think you have too many clothes in your wardrobe? And most of them said no. So there's a bit of an incoherence there. So we've got a few minutes left, but before I open the floor, I've got a question. Paris, Milan, cooperation or competition? Well, I'm part Italian, so I would say competition, because the Italians are noted for that. It's natural, isn't it? In each country, we're all patriotic, particularly fashion designers. I see this, as I said earlier on. I worked in Paris for 10 years. I've worked for French companies, and I've seen the difference between an Italian designer and a French one. But I must say that at Armani, fashion, it belongs to Paris, and I think Mr. Armani will probably believe that as well. And he presented his collections in Paris some years ago because it's a big challenge. Armani knows that Paris is beautiful. Milan is fabulous, despite the fact that it's an industrial city. And Milan is a beautiful city in its own way. And we're so very independent. We've got these couture houses which can be iconic, which are still owned by the founders. I work for one of them, Armani, but there are other examples: Prada, Dolce & Gabbana, Versace, Zegna, Cucinelli, etc., etc. So you've got some Fellini-style capitalism going there. But And it's for that reason that I can say that there is a lot of collaboration with Paris. So thank you very much for inviting me to talk about French fashion and Italian fashion. So there is a lot of cooperation. We know that we are different, and one will never be able to develop fashion if we don't work together. We're not islands. We're not lost out in a. We are connected. Yeah, France is known around the world, as is Italy. And France and Italy form a couple in the creative industries, and it's a vital couple. And just take a look at the name. Well, I can't list all the names, but all of the artistic directors. Look at the names of the top managers. Production is often in France, Italy, also in Portugal, particularly for knitwear. And then there's Fashion Week. Fashion Week has a huge impact. Our federation organizes it in Fashion Week in Paris, and we work very closely with the Italian body in charge of haute couture, etc. So we organize Fashion Weeks together. For Fashion Week in women's fashion in Paris, there are 2 for women, 2 for men, and 2 for haute couture, 2 weeks for haute couture. And Armani has its fashion shows for ready-to-wear in Milan, and it also exhibits in Paris. So there's a huge amount of media impact and media value. It's like the Super Bowl in the States, with celebrities attend. It's so very important, both for Paris and for Milan. So I think over recent years we have strengthened our symbiosis. There have been some wonderful capital cities of fashion, such as London and Paris. Is now Copenhagen, which is emerging, and Shanghai, for example, because all of these fashion weeks are very important for our brands, but there are some very close links, natural links. There's been one day dedicated to Made in France, and we're all involved in that. It's also very important for industrialization and re-industrializing our countries. And it's all tied in with European politics. So fashion creates links. Oh, yes. We have a few minutes remaining if anyone has a question. The microphone is on its way. Hello. I work in asset management. I work on Place Vendôme for a company which is also established in Milan, so I know both cities very well. I would like to say a couple of words and ask a question. I think fashion has always carried values of fairness and equality. Just think that Poiret was the one to thank that we're no longer wearing corsets, and then we have all these miniskirts that have made us more comfortable. It's good for equality. In all industries, we're always talking about ESG, including in fashion. We're building wind turbines and solar panels, etc. in other industries, but fashion is it pollutes a lot, and there's not a lot of governance. You've got all of these extraction of minerals in fashion. We know that there's fast fashion, and it's not ESG friendly because of the volumes we've already talked about. But as far as the fashion designers are concerned and haute couture, what are the challenges that you must rise to in order to set an example and be exemplary? Is it about where you get your supplies from, or is it something else? Well, the value chain is so very important. We work on all of that, of course. Also, environmental performance. And I would say that the whole issue is the notion of being very coherent between ecological efforts, social efforts which are made by these brands, and also public policy standards in Europe. If you take a look at current standards, which are in France and in Europe on sustainability, this concept is very complex. And so in these databases you see in France and in Europe, European standards win. But there can be some very contradictory situations. So the whole challenge is to fairly assess everything that we need to do. You can have a really ecological, brilliant new brand, which is going to have a poor score according to the standards which have been drawn up. So it's all very technical. It's almost scientific, but it's a very important, and that's something which we're waging war on all the time. Well, I think sadly our time is up. We could have continued talking for hours. Well, we'll continue to talk once we leave the stage, of course. I would just like to wrap up by saying that Marnie says that we have to use common sense. We really have to use our common sense in everything, even in the fashion world. You have to use your common sense. Thank you very much.